We haven't had this much trouble in a long time. All right. I gotta get my brain back in gear. Matthew 20, verse 29. All right, so let me just, I actually want to read the whole thing to you, 29 through 34, and then we'll dive into it. So Matthew chapter 20, verse 29 says, "Now as they went out of Jericho, a great multitude followed him. And behold, two blind men sitting by the road, when they heard that Jesus was passing by, cried out, saying, 'Have mercy on us, O Lord, Son of David.' Then the multitude warned them that they should be quiet, but they cried out all the more, saying, 'Have mercy on us, O Lord, Son of David.' So Jesus stood still and called them and said, 'What do you want me to do for you?' They said to him, 'Lord, that our eyes may be opened.' So Jesus had compassion and touched their eyes, and immediately their eyes received sight, and they followed him." So on the one hand, this is a story we've heard before, right? We have certainly seen Jesus healing the blind before. This is not new or surprising. We've certainly seen him do many miracles over and over again. So the first question I got to ask you is, why is this story here? Why did this happen here? What's the point of it being here in the sequence of events that we have going on? So I just want you to think about that as we go through the story, because I'm going to come back to that question at the end to try to give you some insights as to why this story is here, because it's actually really, really important why it's here. But first, let's go back then to verse 29. It says, "Now as they went out of Jericho, a great multitude followed him." Jericho, I'm going to do something I don't do very often, which we've already done today, but let's try something else. I want to show you a map.
You gonna draw it?
I'm going to draw a map. Can you see that? Can you see the map?
Yep, yes.
Okay. So you certainly remember, even if you can't see it clearly, you certainly remember that for most of the time we were, in the book of Matthew, we spent our time up here in Galilee, right? At Bethsaida, Capernaum, Nazareth, all these places up here around the Sea of Galilee. As we said in the last couple of weeks, Jesus now has started south, and he was in this area of Perea that we see on the east side of the Jordan. Now, as we look at this verse here, verse 29, it says now that he went to Jericho. And Jericho, you'll see now, is on the west side of the Jordan. He's crossed over the Jordan River, and he's gone to Jericho. We'll see in next week's lesson, he actually gets to Jerusalem, which is right up here on top of the mountain. So he's down here in Jericho. Jericho is it's a city. You remember Jericho, of course, right? This is where Joshua came across with the whole nation of Israel when they first came into the land, was at Jericho, and the walls came tumbling down, right? But so the city has been rebuilt at this point in time. It is a city, you can see here on the edge of it is this wilderness desert on the left-hand edge. And this is a huge cliff. From Jericho to Jerusalem is about 19 miles, but it's about 3,000 feet of elevation. So it goes straight up through this desert area. But Jericho, you'll see in this map, is a little bit greenish because of the Jordan River flowing down through here. They called it actually the city of palms. There's a lot of palm trees in the area, much like Southern California weather, if you think about it, hot, dry, but a beautiful place to live down in Jericho. So you have them, crossing over the Jordan, coming into Jericho. The mob is pressing against them. So all the people that he has ministered to in Perea are now following them into Jericho because they're all going to Jerusalem. This is the time of the Passover. There'll be, maybe 1 million people that would end up in Jerusalem in that era, which would be a huge, monstrous crowd. So all the people coming from Perea that had heard him speak are following him. The crowd is pressing around him as he gets into Jericho. So that's the picture that I want you to have. The other thing I want you to do is actually turn to Luke chapter 19. I guess I can take this picture off now. We may come back to it later, but so they can see my beautiful face. Go to Luke chapter 19. Verse 1. So here in Luke chapter 19, we have the story of Zacchaeus. So the story of Zacchaeus is not repeated in Matthew, but it's happened at the same time. It's happening as he is, it says here, then Jesus entered and passed through Jericho, right? It's at this time when he's followed by this crowd. And so I wanted to just read through the story real quick, just to, again, give you the picture of what's going on around him. So again, you have the context of the things we're going to see when we go back to Matthew. So let's just read here in Luke chapter 19. It says, then Jesus entered and passed through Jericho, and behold, there was a man named Zacchaeus who was a chief tax collector. He was rich. He sought to see who Jesus was, but he could not because of the crowd, for he was of short stature. So he ran ahead and climbed up into a sycamore tree to see him, for he was going to pass that way. And when Jesus came to the place, he looked up, saw him, and said to him, Zacchaeus, make haste, come down, for today I must stay in your house. So he made haste, came down, and received him joyfully. But when they saw it, they all complained, saying, he is gone to be a guest of a man who is a sinner. Then Zacchaeus stood and said to the Lord, Lord, look, I gave half my goods to the poor. If I have taken anything from anyone by false accusation, I restore fourfold. And Jesus said to him, today salvation has come to this house, because he also is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man has come to seek and to save that which was lost. Right? So we've got this, again, I want you to see the picture of the crowd. The crowd is so large that Zacchaeus could not even see him. He has to climb a tree in order to see Jesus passing by. And I also want you to see the reaction of the crowd, right? When he goes and interacts with Zacchaeus and invites himself to his house, right? The crowd complains, oh, wow, he's gone to be the guest of a sinner, right? That's the reaction of the crowd. We'll see a similar reaction as we get back into Matthew. And of course, as we talked about a couple of weeks ago, we have Zacchaeus then, he turns over half his goods back to the poor. And Jesus' response to him was that salvation's come into this house. He has shown the proper response to Jesus, right? Through the actions that he has taken. As opposed to the rich young ruler that we saw a couple of weeks ago, who did just the opposite. When Jesus told him to give up all his goods, he was not happy about that. All right, so the point is, this is all happening at the same time. Let's go back now to Matthew chapter 20. So in verse 29, so as they went out of Jericho, a great multitude followed him. This is the multitude that we're talking about. All right, so verse 30. And behold, two blind men sitting by the road, when they heard that Jesus was passing by, cried out, saying, have mercy on us, O Lord, Son of David. So I tell you to pay attention to the word behold, right? Whenever the word behold is in there, Jesus is trying to get our attention. He's trying to say, hey, there's something important here. Now, I am curious, what is the important thing that he is trying to point out when he says behold in this sentence? What's the behold point? Well, let's see. It's not blind men. There's blind men all the time, right? It can't be that there's two blind men. No big deal about that. It's not that they're standing by the road. There's lots of people standing by the road. It's not that they're crying out, this is what blind people do, right? Have mercy on us. Well, the thing that is beholding about this statement is that they call him Son of David. That's different. That's surprising. Where in the world did they get that idea? Now, what's important about the phrase Son of David? It's that they are recognizing that he's the Messiah. Right? They understand that he's the Messiah. They would not call him that. That's what that phrase meant. meant that they understood that he was the Messiah. And here you got these two blind guys on the side of the road, and they're yelling out to him, and they're calling him Messiah. They're using this messianic title. Where did they get that revelation from? How did they understand that? We have no idea, right? Other than God revealed to them that this was the Messiah. So that's the behold part of this. Now, the other thing about these two blind men is in the Mark's version of this story, he actually names one of the blind men as the blind man Bartimaeus, right? Whose name you've probably heard before. Now, it is interesting that many of the commentaries indicate that the reason that they named him, they gave his name, is probably he's somebody that all the disciples knew. He's somebody that may have been in the church at this point in time, and they're kind of saying, hey, remember Bartimaeus? This is how he got his sight. This is the story of Bartimaeus. He's the guy that you know. He certainly must have been well known, or they would not have named him in here. So it's interesting that they do that. Now, the other thing just to point out in this verse, it says they cried out, right? They cried out to him. That word is a little bit soft in the English. It really means they screamed, right? They're screaming at the top of their voices. They're trying to get Jesus's attention, right, by saying this. Now, the other thing is in the words that they use, right? They say, have mercy on us, O Lord, Son of David. Have mercy on us. Have mercy on us. Have mercy on us. They're not saying, hey, we got a dirty deal in life and we're blind and we need you to fix this. They're not, and they're not like the Pharisees saying, wow, we are so wonderful. There's no way we should be blind because we've done so many good things. Their response is, have mercy on us, right? Which again takes us right back to the Beatitudes, right? They're coming to him with a poor in spirit attitude. They're coming to him with a, we don't deserve it, but we're looking for mercy. We're looking for grace. They have the right attitude as they're coming to him. And they're calling him, they call him Lord, and they call him Son of David. They recognize that, the Lord title could mean many different things. It could simply mean master, rabbi. It doesn't mean anything in a spiritual sense the way that we think about it. They're just saying, they're just treating him with respect, if you will. Oh, you who are important, right? I mean, that's really all they're saying with Lord. But the Son of David title, that is definitely messianic. So they recognize he's somebody important. He's somebody that they should have respect for. There's somebody that they believe he is the Messiah, right? And they come to him with this complete unworthiness, this complete lack of merit, as opposed to many others that we've seen in the passages in recent weeks. All right, so that's verse 30. Verse 31, then the multitude warned them that they should be quiet, but they cried out all the more, saying, have mercy on us, O Lord, Son of David. So they're warned by the crowd to be quiet. So again, you got to have this picture in your mind. You've got this crowd going through. These people are following Jesus. And these people are thinking, okay, this is it. All right. Now Jesus is about to enter Jerusalem. Everything that we have hoped for these 3 years is going to happen now, right? This is the king coming into his kingship. This is it. And we got these two screaming guys on the side of the road messing everything up, right? They're just irritating. They're just shut up, you guys. Let's get together. Let's all be fired up about what's going on here. They just, and honestly, this is the typical response of crowds, right? They're not really interested in what Jesus is doing. They're not interested in what's really going on here. They're just interested in there's a huge crowd, and hey, I want to be a part of that. And let's make sure we keep it on the fun and not worry about anything serious here. Certainly not a bunch of blind beggars on the side of the road. Anyway, we'll talk more about that in a minute. But look at verse 32. So Jesus stood still and called them and said, "What do you want me to do for you?" The first thing is just the dramatic part here is that Jesus stood still. So again, you got this mob, you got this crowd pushing their way through Jerusalem, past Jerusalem, on their way to, through Jericho, past Jericho, on their way to Jerusalem. And all of a sudden, Jesus stops and stands still. You know, it's in my mind, if you remember the old E.F. Hutton commercials, right? It's kind of like, you know, when E.F. Hutton speaks, everybody listens, right? Jesus stops, and you can just see the whole crowd stops, right? The whole, you know, hundreds of thousands of people potentially going up this road. All of a sudden, the whole thing stops as Jesus stops and stands still. And you gotta just see, Jesus knows where he's going, right? He knows he's going to Jerusalem. He knows he's going for the last time along this route. He knows he's going to redeem the whole world. And he is not too busy to stop and pay attention to these two beggars. It just smacks me in the head a little bit, right? About the times I say to myself, gee, if I had a little more time, I would stop and help. If I had a little more time, I would do something about that. If I wasn't so busy, because I'm really busy, then I would stop and I would do something about this situation. I would help those people. I would, whatever it is, right? But I'm so busy. And Jesus is on his way to redeem the world. He's got a clock that's tick, tick, ticking, and he stops. He stops because of these two blind beggars. It's just an amazing response. All right. In here it says it says he called them, and Mark, it's a little bit more extended. He says he actually sent a messenger and called back to them to bring them forward. So it's likely that Jesus, had already passed by the two beggars. He still hears them screaming, and he decides to stop. He sends back a messenger, and Jesus calls them. I mean, the little words in here are important, right? He stands still and he calls them. He calls them unto himself. And then he asks this most bizarre of questions. What do you want me to do for you, you two blind guys? What do you want me to do for you? Why does he ask this question?
I think it's interesting that they knew who he was. They knew he could do anything. He's the Messiah. He could do anything. And yet he stops and asks them, what do you want me to do? So I guess in light of the fact that they knew he could do anything, he could, he could do anything they asked, but they asked this because I guess it's the most pressing need they had. But he knew that they knew. Does that make sense? He knew that they knew who he really was, that he could do anything. Mm-hmm. I guess he wanted them to say that to verify their most pressing need, their most anxious need, their most prevalent need at the time.
I agree with all that, Russell. Any other thoughts on this?
Well, that could be, I don't want to say generic, but I'll say a generic term in that they could be speaking for the crowd. I mean, it didn't say heal us, open our eyes. So we could take that as if we're not blind physically, to open our eyes to what's going on for the crowd.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about how much noise is probably going on. And even in the midst of all the noise and probably confusion, Jesus still heard what the two men were trying to get him to hear.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, that he even heard that he pulled out of the mass of humanity those two voices, right, and responded to those. It makes me feel better about my prayers, right? That Jesus can pull out of the mass of humanity my prayers and listen to them. He heard these two men. It's a good point, Curtis.
It tested their faith, obviously, but I heard a verse yesterday that I was listening to, and the guy's comment, it really made my mind spin. when you step out in faith, you leave your realm and step into God's realm.
Good. So what's interesting, I'm sorry?
This is just another of the miracles that he did, and the purpose, or the main purposes of the miracles that he did was to prove his messiahship.
Yeah, absolutely.
Prove to the crowd who he was. And he did that with this interaction.
One thing that's interesting about this question that he asks is, if you remember the story from a couple of weeks ago of the sons of Zebedee's mother, right? Who came to Jesus and said, if we read the Mark version, right, it was, would you do for us anything we ask of you? And Jesus' response to him was, what do you want me to do? It's the same question. The same question that he asked James and John's mother was, what do you want me to do for you? What does he ask this blind beggar? What do you want me to do for you? Look at the difference in the responses, right? What did the sons of Zebedee's mother say? Well, we want these two boys to be the greatest in the kingdom. That's what we want. We want, them to be looked upon as amazing and wonderful. This guy goes, no, I just want my sight. They had a complete, Jesus is no question, there's no question, as Russell said, that he's trying to get to what is their real deepest need. What do they really want? It's an interesting question to ask yourself. If Jesus were to come to you and say, hey, what do you really want from me? What would your response be? Right? He's trying to get them to really get to what is it that they really, really need? What is their deepest need that they have here? Because it would have been normal for them to say, alms, right? Beggars on the side of the road, just send me money. Give me some money. This is what frustrates me sometimes with people on the side of the road that we passed, right? They just want money. They don't want a job. If this guy gets his sight, what's he going to have to do? He can't sit on the side of the road anymore and beg for money. He's going to have to go get a job. He's going to have to be a part of society. So it's a very important question that Jesus asks him, and his response is very important.
Does it?
Go ahead.
Does it rings a little bit to me when I read it. I hadn't really thought about it until you started down this line of questioning, but it smacks of Solomon. When God asked Solomon, ask me for anything, whatever you want. And Solomon asked for wisdom. And because he asked for wisdom, God gave him everything.
Yeah. Yeah, it's one of those really important questions that we just kind of zoom over in this story, but it is the important question for all of us. Really, what do you want? What do you want from me? What do you want from me? What do you want in this life? What do you want in eternity? What do you want? Anyway, okay, good. I think you got it. Verse 33. And they said to him, Lord, that our eyes may be opened, right? So they confessed of their blindness. Again, in them saying this, they are saying several things, right? They've already said, we see you as Lord, we see you as Messiah, but now they also see him as someone who can heal, right? Someone who can bring them their sight. The other thing this does in this interaction is you got to think the crowd is all around watching this, right? It raises now the expectation of the crowd. Well, he didn't just ask for money, Jesus. He asked you to give him sight. Now the expectation of the crowd is up. Whoa, we're about to see something incredible. He's just not going to give them a couple of coins. We're about to see something amazing. And that's important as we get to the rest of the story. So verse 34 says, so Jesus had compassion, touched their eyes, and immediately their eyes received sight, and they followed him. So the first thing, and perhaps the most important thing in this whole picture is, so Jesus had compassion, right? Jesus had compassion. Why did he stop to listen to these guys in the first place? Yeah, as somebody said, it's another proof of his messiahship, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But mostly it's because this is the heart of God. It's compassion. It's love. It's who he is. One of the commentaries said this, and I'm still thinking about it, but I thought I'd share it with you. And that is, he not only knows the pain that we feel, he feels the pain that we feel. If we're his children, if you have children who are in pain, you're in pain. Right, Russell and Debbie? If you have a grandchild in pain, you're in pain.
Yep.
And I think that's what God is saying here. He feels the pain of those beggars. The other thing along those lines that this commentary said, which is powerful to think about, was when he allows you to suffer, he suffers with you. When he allows you to suffer, he's suffering also because you're his child. That's important. It's one of those things I need to think more about. All right, so the compassion, the heart of God, the love of God, the feeling part of God is all in this as we see his response. He touched them. Now, did Jesus always touch people when he healed them? No. Say no.
No.
Sometimes he did. Sometimes he did it. Sometimes he stuck people's fingers in ears. Sometimes he used spit and mud, right? Other times he just said the word. So don't take this as well. Here, if I want to do a miracle, here's how I do it, right? That's not the point. But in this particular case, he did touch them, and I like that. Again, connected to the compassion. These were not people that were untouchable. These beggars on the side of the road. These are people he was willing to touch. When he touches them, all physical laws are now set aside, right? Everything normal, everything that human people can understand is now set aside when he touches them. And the other thing I want you to hear importantly is Jesus created seeing eyes in those men. We think of it as healing, but he created seeing eyes, right? I've been impressed as we've gone through Matthew and we've looked at the miracles of Jesus to see Jesus as the creator, right? He's the creator. He creates eyes that see. And we talked about this before when we talked about people that, had partial limbs, then all of a sudden they had full legs, right? He actually creates a leg that works on these people. Here, he's creating eyes that see. He's the creator God. And he does it instantaneously, right? There's no, well, come back in a couple of weeks and we'll see how you do it, right? He does it instantaneously. And this is a direct result of prophecy. If you need the verse, it's back in Isaiah 35:5, where it says that when the Messiah comes, he will bring sight to the blind, right? So this is a direct proof of prophecy, proof of who he is. Now, the story would be great if it's all there, but there's one more thing in this story that we got to cover that's really important. It says, and immediately their eyes received sight, and they followed him. They followed him. I want you to see the verse in Mark. So go to Mark. Actually, I didn't even write it down. I think it's Mark chapter 10. We'll find it. Go there. We'll find it together.
Tell them what you.
Yeah, Mark chapter 10, verse 46 and following. It's actually verse 52 that I want us to go to. Mark 10:52. Mark 10:52. So again, here we have the same story. Mark is telling it. We've looked at it. We've talked about it a couple different ways. But look in verse 52. It says, then Jesus said to him, go your way. Your faith has made you well. And immediately he received his sight and followed Jesus on the road. Right? Which sounds very similar to what we've said, except for this little phrase, go your way. Your faith has made you well. Your faith has made you well. We've seen this phrase once before, actually not in Matthew, but we took a side trip at one point earlier to Luke chapter 17. So I know, but hold your finger there and go to Luke chapter 17. Luke chapter 17, verse 11, and following. And I'll remind you of this story. Here we have in Luke chapter 17, verse 11 and following, we have the story of the 10 lepers. You remember the 10 lepers came to him. They asked him to have mercy on us. He heals them, and he tells them to go and show yourselves to the priests to show that you've been healed. And then if you go down to verse 17 from chapter 17, one of the men returns. In verse 17 it says, so Jesus answered, said, were there not 10 that were cleansed? And where are the 9? Were there not any found who returned to give glory to God except this one foreigner? And he said to him, arise, go your way, your faith has made you well. This is actually the same phrase that we've just read here in Mark. What does this phrase mean? Remember the story of the 10 lepers. 10 were healed. They went to the priest. 1 returned to Jesus to thank him, to praise him, to worship him. And he says to that one, your faith has made you well. What we said at that time was the word well there, some of you may have your faith has made you whole, is the same word that's used for saved. Your faith has saved you. Your faith has made you complete, made you whole. So what are you saying to this one, the one of the 10 lepers? 10 of them were healed, but only one of them was saved. The same thing, he's saying the same thing here to the blind men. Now back in Mark chapter 10, verse 52, go your way, your faith has made you whole, your faith has saved you. So Jesus is saying here to this blind men, again, in Mark and Luke, there's one man, Bartimaeus. In Matthew, there's 2 men. It's not important. But he's saying that their faith has made them whole. Their faith has saved them. What is he saying?
He didn't do it. It was their faith that did it. He
Did what? Did what, CT?
I can't put it into words, I guess.
He saved them, not just physically, but spiritually.
Yeah. One got a temporary answer to a need in a worldly sense. The other got eternal life.
So let me say something really profound. I don't say many profound things, but this is one, right? And it is this. In the New Testament, you did not have to have faith to be healed. We said dead people arise. We see friends of other people who are healed. But you have to have faith to be saved. You don't have to have faith to be healed. You have to have faith to be saved. So that's what Jesus is actually saying here. He's not saying your faith got you healed. No, I healed you. I healed you because I wanted to, because I had compassion, because you needed it. But because I saw your faith, I saved you. I made you whole. I made you complete. I brought you into my family. Salvation requires faith. Healing does not. Jesus heals who he wants to heal.
The salvation also requires an acknowledgement of a need.
Yes. What's interesting here about these men, what did they come to Jesus with? They came calling him Lord. They came calling him Messiah. They came understanding that he could heal them. That was all the faith they brought to the table. And based upon the faith that they brought to the table, Jesus gave them salvation. Was it complete faith in who he was and what his mission was, and what the kingdom was all about? Did they understand all that? No. But they had enough faith in who he was and who he was in order for him to save them. I think it's an interesting and beautiful picture. You know, we often think about, salvation of kids when they come. Well, did they really understand it all? Well, they had enough faith to be saved. They had enough faith to be saved. I think these blind men had enough faith to be saved. And Jesus decides, by the way, right? And he was the one who said, I will make you whole, or you have been made whole. Any other thoughts on that?
Hey, Rich, I wrote something in my Bible a while back. I think this is from a book on prayer by Philip Yancey, but it says, it talks about seeking healing or whatever. It says, I seek the gift, find instead the giver, and come away with the gift I no longer seek. So it's interesting, we're asking for healing, but then, physical healing, but then God gives us, through Christ, a healing that we didn't even necessarily expect, or,
Because as we know, but we don't think about, we're all going to die anyway, right? The important part is not to get healed. The important part is to get saved, right?
It's kind of like open our eyes, literally and metaphorically speaking.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Rich, let me ask you a question. Do you think it's a dumb question, but I'm going to ask it. Do you think some believers believe because of a need, but yet they never go deeper? They never really fully understand eternal life, that their faith is based on something so temporary that they don't, for whatever reason, they can't make the next step.
Let me say it a different way, Russell. Let me say it this way. Do I believe there are a lot of people in the church who are there for what they can get?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Rather than are they there because of a relationship with Christ, right? They're there for the good feeling. They're there for, they love the music. They're there for, people look at me because they say I'm a Christian. They think I'm better, right? They're there for a lot of other reasons. Yeah. One of the commentaries had this statement. It says, people don't follow Jesus blindly, but when he opens their eyes, then they follow him. People don't follow Jesus blindly, but when he opens their eyes, then they follow him. I mean, all it says in our Mark version here, right, is that he followed them, right? He followed him, right? That's the way this passage ends. He follows him. But that phrase is really important. It's not just that he went along with the crowd, because Mark gives us a little bit more insight that Jesus lets them know. All right, so now let's go back to my first question, which was, why is this lesson here? So let me answer it this way. One, it shows the heart of God, right? It's about compassion. He again, in the midst of this, the last week of his life, he stops to heal these two guys. It's just beyond my ability to think about how I could deal with that, right? In the midst of everything going on in my life, I would stop to worry about somebody else and what's going on in their life. And this is what Jesus did. And then as we've said, it also fulfills prophecy, right? If as we said, the Isaiah 53 thing, right? Where he said he's going to heal the blind men. It's also a preview of the millennium, right? When there'll be no blind, there'll be no sick, there'll be no healing. He's giving them a picture of that. And as we've just talked about here, it's a picture and a story about spiritual blindness. No question about that. The other thing, it's also a example of last week's lesson. You remember last week's lesson, which was about it didn't matter when you came into the kingdom, whether you came in early and you served your whole life, or you came in late as the thief on the cross. Here's these guys in the last week of Jesus's life. There's been disciples been following for 3 years. These guys are now going to follow him for a couple of days before the whole thing is over. But I actually think the more important reason that this is here is given in Luke chapter 18. So go there. This is Luke's version of the same story. And yeah, this is Luke's version of the same story. Luke chapter 18, at the end of the very last sentence, verse 43. Luke chapter 18, 43. By the way, look at 42. Then Jesus said to him, receive your sight, your faith has made you well. Right? He repeats the same thing that we saw from Mark. But look in verse 43. It says, and immediately he received his sight and followed him, glorifying God, and all the people, when they saw it, gave praise to God. The multitude starts praising God because of what they've seen. In all the stories where we have seen healings by Jesus in the past, those stories have ended with Jesus saying something. You remember what he said?
Don't tell anybody. Yeah.
Joe got it. Don't tell anybody. Right? Don't tell anyone. Keep this quiet. Now he's not saying that. The blind men are praising him, and that now is going through the whole crowd. Hundreds of thousands of people who are moving towards Jerusalem are beginning to praise him. This is Jesus preparing for next week's lesson on the triumphal entry, right? This is Jesus getting the crowd stoked about what is about to happen as he enters. My point in saying that is, there are those who say, oh, Jesus was a great teacher who got himself in trouble and they decided to kill him. No, this was his plan, right? His plan was his death. And this is the beginning of it right here. He gets these two blind men, they receive their sight, which is, just is not done. He does it right in front of this big crowd. He stops, right? He stops and he does this. It's intentionally the first messianic display that swept the crowd into the hosannas of Palm Sunday, which led to his death. This was his plan. I believe that's why this is here. That's why he heals these two. Yes, he had compassion. Yes, he wanted to show he was the Messiah. Yes, 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 yes. But it's here because it was to get the crowd ready. And one thing we'll see as we look next week, the Pharisees had warned the crowd, hey, if you see Jesus, let us know. We want to take care of it before it becomes a problem. Well, it's a problem. The crowd is already involved. This was Jesus's plan. This was God's plan. This was not a surprise to him, what happens in Jerusalem in the days ahead. All right. Any other thoughts?
I got one.
Yes, sir.
I've been wanting to ask you, I wonder what the people that were trying to get them to shut up were feeling, but you just answered it with this last verse. But it also made me think that there are probably times, not probably, I know there are times in my life and others where people are trying to tell us something and we just don't get what they're trying to tell us. We're missing out. Maybe they're annoying to us or something, but there's a deeper reason for what they're trying to tell us, and we just don't get it. I think it made me think of Melody's friend Meredith that committed suicide. And, you know, Melody's looked back lots of times about comments she made. And she says like she just didn't get what she might have been telling Melody she didn't want to do it, but Melody, you know, I don't want to put words in Melody's mouth, but she looks back now and saying she's probably missed something that she was trying to tell her.
What's interesting is, you know, we'll see even next week as we look at this, is that even at the triumphal entry, the disciples have no clue what's going on. They don't get it until after the resurrection, and they look back and go, oh, now I understand those two blind men. Now I understand the triumphal entry. Yeah, I think there's a lot of times when we have to look back to understand what God has done.
One of the things that just popped into my head when you were talking about all the healings again, and I think I thought about this before, but it just kind of came to my head again. And we were actually watching episode 3 of The Chosen last season last night. And so he healed the lady who was bleeding and the dead girl in that episode. And the disciples I was sitting there going, how are they so oblivious? Were they really this oblivious? I mean, so he's painted that same picture in that series, how oblivious they were. And yeah, what you just said, and the same thing for the people there were so many people probably healed that walked away. And they followed him. But people who were healed and then left. Yeah, they took the healing and they didn't give a flip about how they were healed. And it's just that it blows my mind.
Well, see, you know, it certainly we don't do that when God does something wonderful for us. We certainly remember it and we praise Him for it. We certainly don't just pass it off as a coincidence.
You said that we are always looking back and see what God did, and I think the disciples did that too. But you know, that was brought home to me powerfully at the end of last year. We went through the kitchen business. I mean, when you're in the middle of that, like the disciples are in the middle of this, it's next to impossible for you to see. It is only when you come out the other end and look back that you can see God working, see the hand of God.
So when I looked at the faith part of it, doesn't take a lot of faith to be saved. I compare that to the faith of a mustard seed. You could move a mountain, and I'm thinking, how many times do we say we've got complete faith that God is going to do something? If you could measure that, what's your percentage? Where in a number scale does your faith? You know, we're not even in the little decimals of the faith that it would take to be saved if God didn't have compassion on us.
Well, I mean, the thing is, it doesn't take a lot of faith on our part because it's all Him. Right? It's all Him. It depends on if we have faith in the right person, no problem. We can have a little bitty faith as long as it's in the right person. But it doesn't matter. It's not about how much faith in the right kind of, it's all about having faith in the right person. That's the key. So good point.
Yeah, my last thought was, what about the 9 other lepers? Just like Curtis was saying, the Melody, her friend, didn't recognize. Why didn't the light turn on? I mean, God touched them, like CT was saying. God touched their lives. Why didn't they respond? Why didn't the light turn on? Why didn't they acknowledge Him as Messiah? You know, that's one of those questions that we ask God when we get to heaven, because only God knows. I guess He knows the timing.
Russell, I'm not confused by that at all, because those 9 lepers were just like me.
Yeah.
And I see things happen in my life that God has done, and I just ignore them and move on. and don't acknowledge him and don't praise him and don't thank him. I'm just like those 9 lepers. That does not confuse me at all. They're human, stupid
And-
humans, just like us.
We don't know what they did later. I mean,
We don't. We don't.
months later, all of a sudden the light may have come on, you know, or
Yep.
Well, and it confirms to me that God always has a purpose and a plan.
Yeah.
You know, nothing was a surprise to him on that day. There's always a purpose. We don't see it. We may not know it, but there's always a purpose and a plan.
Yep. A good ending note. All right. Thanks, guys. This will just powerfully, so I appreciate you guys taking the time to think it through. All right, prayer requests. Joanne.
Recording.
Prayers for Tricia and Chad.